Ayesha was a hard-working woman, juggling the responsibilities of being a mother to two young children while trying to make ends meet in a small suburban neighborhood. Life had never been easy for her. With her husband working long hours in a low-paying job, Ayesha found herself taking up a cleaning job at the local school. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover the bills, let alone provide her children with the things they deserved. She constantly felt the weight of guilt, knowing she couldn't give them the life she dreamed of for them. She loved her children deeply, and every day she wrestled with her inner conflict. She wanted to be a better provider, someone who could offer them not just the essentials, but the little joys that make life special: new clothes, toys, vacations, the occasional treat. But despite her tireless efforts, it seemed like every paycheck barely stretched enough to cover the basics. One afternoon, while breastfeeding her youngest, Ayesha overheard a conversation in the school's staff room. The teachers and staff were discussing the growing concern about the lack of affordable and healthy snacks for the students. Many of the children came from low-income families, and nutritious options were hard to come by. As she listened to the conversation, a thought struck her. What if she could help solve this problem? The idea seemed so outlandish at first, but the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like a viable solution. Could she sell her breast milk as yogurt for the school children? Yogurt. It was the perfect snack. Healthy, easy to make, and something that could be marketed as homemade and wholesome. Ayesha knew that yogurt was a popular choice among children. It was nutritious, something parents loved to buy, and it could be made in bulk without too much difficulty. Most importantly, it could be sold as a homemade product, something that could appeal to both teachers and parents who were concerned about their children's diets. As the idea continued to grow in her mind, Ayesha began to think of the possibilities. This could be the break she needed. She could finally provide for her children in a way that felt meaningful, something she could be proud of. But even as excitement bubbled within her, a sense of unease lingered. Would people accept it? Would they think it was too strange? Too taboo? Still, the opportunity felt too perfect to ignore. And with a sense of determination, Ayesha decided to take the leap. Ayesha's financial struggles had reached a breaking point. The bills were piling up, and with each passing day, she felt the weight of her responsibilities bearing down harder on her shoulders. The cleaning job she held at the local school was barely enough to cover the basics, let alone the things her children deserved. There were times she would lie awake at night, worrying about how she could make more money without sacrificing the time she spent with her kids. The thought of being stuck in this cycle forever haunted her. That's when the idea about selling breast milk as yogurt kept creeping into her mind, and slowly it started to make sense. Ayesha rationalized the decision in her mind, convincing herself that it wasn't as unusual as it seemed. Many mothers already sold their breast milk for other purposes, and this was just a more creative way to use it. After all, it wasn't like she was doing anything dangerous or immoral. She would be providing a nutritious snack for the children at the school. She thought about the shortage of healthy food options, the lack of affordable alternatives for many parents, and how her product could meet a real need. The idea seemed harmless enough, and Ayesha was desperate for a way to improve her financial situation. She justified her choice by telling herself that it wasn't too different from selling any other homemade product. Many small businesses started in a similar way. Someone saw an opportunity, took a risk, and turned it into something successful. So why not her? To ensure she was making the right decision, Ayesha spent hours researching how to turn breast milk into yogurt. She scoured the internet for tutorials, reading recipes, and watching instructional videos. The process seemed straightforward enough, but she was still uncertain about how it would turn out. She had never done anything like this before, and the idea of turning something so personal into a product for public consumption made her feel a mix of excitement and unease. Despite her nerves, she felt a surge of determination. This could be her way out. If this worked, she could finally stop worrying about money. She could buy her children the things they deserved, take a vacation, and live a life without the constant pressure of financial strain. And so, after making sure she had everything she needed, Ayesha decided to move forward. The first batch of yogurt was made in her small kitchen. She took extra care, ensuring the process was sanitary and that every step was followed meticulously. It felt surreal as she worked, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred the mixture, praying that it would turn out just right. Ayesha packaged the yogurt into small glass jars, each one carefully labeled with homemade yogurt for school kids, healthy and nutritious. She was excited about what she had created, but at the same time, there was a deep sense of guilt gnawing at her. What if it was discovered? What if someone found out the truth? She quickly pushed those thoughts aside, telling herself that this was no different from selling any other homemade product at a farmer's market. Once the yogurt was ready, Ayesha discreetly offered it to a few of the teachers and school staff members. She was careful not to raise suspicion, presenting it as just another homemade product she had been experimenting with. The teachers were intrigued and praised the yogurt for its taste and nutritional value. One by one, they began to spread the word among other staff members, and before long, the yogurt was gaining traction. The response was overwhelmingly positive. The teachers loved it and thought it was a great way to provide a healthy snack to the kids, something that was both affordable and nutritious. Ayesha began to feel a sense of accomplishment, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, this risk was going to pay off. She kept the secret closely guarded, not telling her family or friends about the new venture. But with each jar sold, Ayesha could feel the excitement building. Word of mouth was doing its job, and her yogurt was becoming a quiet success. As the days passed, Ayesha found herself making more and more batches, secretly providing the yogurt to the school and receiving positive feedback from everyone involved. She couldn't believe how quickly her little venture had taken off. Despite the nervousness that still lurked in the back of her mind, she began to feel confident in her decision. This was her chance to change her life. As weeks passed, Ayesha began to notice a remarkable change. What had started as a small, discreet experiment in her kitchen had quickly turned into a thriving business. Word of mouth about the homemade yogurt spread like wildfire, and soon, teachers were recommending it to parents as a healthy, affordable snack for their children. The children themselves loved it. Its creamy texture, slightly sweet taste, and nutritional value made it a favorite among the students. Ayesha had unknowingly tapped into a market that was desperate for nutritious, budget-friendly snack options. The demand for her yogurt grew exponentially. Teachers began requesting larger quantities to keep up with the growing number of students wanting it, and parents started calling her directly, asking if they could buy jars for their children. Ayesha, initially hesitant to take on such a responsibility, found herself making regular deliveries to the school. Each new order brought with it a sense of accomplishment, and soon she was making a steady income from her unique product. What had once been a financial burden was now starting to ease. Ayesha was no longer struggling to make ends meet. She was thriving. The extra income not only alleviated her financial stress, but also boosted Ayesha's confidence. She was no longer the woman who could barely scrape by. She was a mother and a businesswoman, someone who had turned a simple idea into something that was positively impacting her community. Every time she handed over a jar of yogurt, she felt a sense of pride. She was providing for her children in a way she had never imagined possible. The constant anxiety that used to consume her was slowly replaced by a new sense of empowerment. She could pay the bills without worry, buy her children new clothes, and even save a little for the future. Ayesha's transformation was not just financial. Her self-worth had been profoundly affected by her newfound success. She had always felt like she wasn't doing enough, that she was falling short as a mother and provider. But now, she felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known in years. She had done something on her own, something that had allowed her to stand tall with pride. The smile on her children's faces as they played with their new toys or wore their new clothes was proof enough that she had made the right decision. But there was another shift happening too, one that Ayesha hadn't anticipated: the growing public opinion around her yogurt. At first, the parents of the children who consumed the yogurt had no reason to question its source. Ayesha had cultivated an image of reliability and care. She was the friendly mother of two who worked hard to make sure her family was well taken care of. She had a warm, trustworthy demeanor that made it easy for others to accept her product without giving it a second thought. Ayesha had worked hard to maintain this image. She made sure to emphasize that the yogurt was homemade from a trusted source. She never mentioned the true origin, though, carefully sidestepping any questions about how she made it. Most parents didn't ask for specifics. They were simply grateful for an affordable and healthy option for their children. They believed it was just a well-meaning mother who had come up with a creative way to help the school. They had no reason to suspect anything different. Ayesha kept the secret tightly under wraps, telling herself that as long as the yogurt was good and the children loved it, there was no harm done. She convinced herself that the ends justified the means. After all, the children were getting a nutritious snack, and she was providing for her family. She felt that no one needed to know the full details. The truth, however, was still lurking in the background, and Ayesha found herself walking a fine line between maintaining her success and protecting her secret. The more popular her product became, the more she felt the pressure to keep it hidden. She worried about what would happen if someone discovered the truth. What would the parents think? What would the school officials say? Would the teachers who had been her biggest supporters turn against her? Despite these concerns, Ayesha continued to push forward, driven by the satisfaction of seeing her business grow and her children benefit from her hard work. The success of her yogurt business brought in steady orders and a growing sense of accomplishment. She was able to pay off some debts, buy her children things she had once only dreamed of, and even think about expanding. Perhaps one day she could sell her yogurt to other schools, or even market it to grocery stores. The possibilities seemed endless, and the thought of expanding her business made her heart race with excitement. But even with all the success and the positive feedback, Ayesha couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the truth might eventually come to light. She had convinced herself that her actions were harmless, but deep down, she knew that the secrecy would only last for so long. The small suburban community where Ayesha had built her yogurt business was tight-knit, with everyone seemingly knowing everyone else. Life was peaceful, and people trusted one another, often assuming the best of their neighbors. However, not everyone was content with the way things were. Ria, a new mother who had recently enrolled her child at the school, was different. She was curious by nature and always kept a close eye on what was happening in her community. Ria had heard rumors circulating among the other parents about Ayesha's homemade yogurt. At first, she dismissed them as mere gossip, but over time, she started to notice things that didn't quite add up. Parents would speak highly of the yogurt's taste and nutrition, but there was something about the way they talked about it that made Ria uneasy. The fact that so many children were consuming it without hesitation seemed odd, especially considering that Ayesha was the school cleaner and not someone known for running a business. As someone who had always been cautious about where her child's food came from, Ria couldn't help but feel a bit suspicious. Her curiosity grew as she followed Ayesha on social media. Ria observed Ayesha's posts, which were often about her children, her job, and the occasional mention of the yogurt. However, there were subtle signs that didn't sit right with her. Ayesha would occasionally post photos of the yogurt jars, but the pictures seemed overly staged. The labels, though neatly done, didn't quite look professional. And there was one post where Ayesha mentioned homemade treats from a trusted source, but never clarified who the source actually was. Ria's suspicions began to escalate, and she decided to dig deeper. She asked around among the parents who had bought the yogurt, but they only had positive things to say. No one questioned its source or authenticity. That only fueled Ria's doubts further. She decided to speak with the teachers who had been buying the yogurt for their classrooms. To her shock, The teachers spoke highly of the product, but knew very little about its actual origins. Some mentioned they had heard it was homemade, but no one seemed to know exactly where Ayesha was getting the yogurt from. It was clear that there was more to the story than what Ayesha had shared. At this point, Ria had enough information to form a clearer picture, but she needed confirmation. She began visiting local food stores and asking if anyone had seen Ayesha's yogurt being sold. No one had, which confirmed her suspicions. Ayesha wasn't buying the yogurt from a store or factory. She was making it herself. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Ria spoke to one of the school staff members who had known Ayesha for years. This staff member, who had worked with her closely, hesitated before revealing something troubling. According to the source, Ayesha had been using her own breast milk to make the yogurt. The staff member had heard whispers among the teachers who had been curious about the unusual consistency and nutritional profile of the yogurt. After a bit of digging, the truth came out. Ayesha had been selling her breast milk as yogurt to the school for months. Ria was stunned by the revelation. She could hardly believe what she had learned. The next step was clear. She had to confront Ayesha. She didn't want to make accusations without hearing her side, but she felt morally compelled to get to the truth. The following day, Ria arranged to meet with Ayesha. She was calm but firm when she approached her. "Ayesha," Ria began, "I've heard some things, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you really selling breast milk as yogurt to the school?" Ayesha froze, her face paling as the weight of the question hit her. She tried to remain composed, but her nervousness was palpable. She stammered, then sighed deeply. "Yes," she finally admitted. "I've been using my own milk to make the yogurt, but it's healthy, it's nutritious, it's good for the kids." Ria, though taken aback, pressed further. "But don't you think people should know where it's coming from? Don't you think they deserve to know what they're feeding their children?" Ayesha's face flushed red. She had always convinced herself that her actions were harmless, but now, in the face of Ria's challenge, she began to feel the weight of her decision more than ever. "I didn't think it was a big deal," she murmured. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I just wanted to help. The kids love it, the teachers love it, and it's been helping me pay the bills." Ria shook her head in disbelief. "You can't keep this secret. What if parents find out? What if the school finds out?" she warned. Ayesha looked down, her eyes brimming with tears. She had never imagined that things would spiral out of control like this. She had justified her actions by focusing on the positive aspects, the money, the success, and the fact that the children were getting a healthy snack. But now, with Ria's confrontation, the reality of her choices began to sink in. Ria, seeing that Ayesha was clearly struggling with the weight of the truth, made her decision. "I'm not going to expose you, Ayesha, but you have to come clean. If you don't, I will. It's only fair that the parents know what their children are eating." The moment Ria left, Ayesha sat in her kitchen, the gravity of the situation sinking in. It didn't take long for word to spread through the community. The other parents began to whisper, and soon the rumors were out in full force. Parents were horrified when they learned the truth. Some were enraged that Ayesha had exploited their children for personal gain, while others were disgusted by the idea that something as intimate and personal as breast milk had been used for commercial purposes without their knowledge. The school administration acted swiftly. Ayesha was called into a meeting with the principal, who had been informed about the situation. He expressed his disappointment and concern over the breach of trust, and within hours, Ayesha was fired. The school severed all ties with her and issued a statement to the parents, explaining that they would be taking immediate steps to ensure the safety and well-being of the students. Ayesha's world crumbled. She had gone from being a beloved, trusted figure in the community to being the subject of public outrage. The judgment from the parents was harsh, and Ayesha could feel their eyes on her every time she walked down the street. Her business, once a source of pride and empowerment, had become a scandal, and the weight of her actions was heavier than ever. She had crossed a line she could never take back, and the consequences were more severe than she could have ever anticipated. Ayesha's world was shattered. The public backlash was swift and brutal. Once a woman who had been admired for her resourcefulness and determination, she now found herself at the center of a scandal that no one in her community could ignore. The shame weighed heavily on her, and she began to question everything. She had never intended for things to spiral so far, but now she was left to deal with the consequences of her actions. In the quiet moments when she was alone, Ayesha's mind would race. How had she gotten here? She had been so focused on the immediate financial relief that selling the yogurt had brought her, but now, looking back, she realized just how reckless and misguided it all had been. The extra money had allowed her to support her children in ways she hadn't imagined, but at what cost? Was it worth sacrificing her dignity and reputation for a few months of financial stability? Her children were the hardest part. They were young, innocent, and now they were the subject of whispered gossip at school. They were embarrassed to show their faces in public, their classmates making cruel remarks about their mother. Ayesha's heart broke every time they came home from school with their heads hung low, unable to escape the ridicule. She had wanted to protect them, to give them the best, but in the end, she had only brought them shame. Her husband, Faisal, was equally devastated. He had always been a quiet and patient man, but this was too much for him to bear. He felt betrayed, not only by Ayesha, but by the entire situation. They had been through financial struggles before, but this was something different. He couldn't understand why Ayesha hadn't come to him for help. He had always tried to support her in every way he could, but now it felt like she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "I never wanted this," Ayesha would say, her voice breaking with emotion. "I just wanted to help our family." But her words felt hollow to everyone around her. Faisal, torn between his love for her and his anger at her actions, struggled to know how to support her. The guilt that Ayesha felt consumed her every moment. She couldn't escape the thoughts that plagued her mind, thoughts of what she had done, and how she had betrayed the trust of her friends, her neighbors, and most painfully, her children. The legal consequences soon followed. The school had filed a formal complaint, and the authorities were now involved. Ayesha was facing potential charges for fraud, misrepresentation, and endangering the health and safety of children. Though she had never intended for the yogurt to harm anyone, the mere fact that she had been selling breast milk without disclosing it to the parents or the school was enough to make her vulnerable to legal action. The thought of possibly going to jail, losing everything, filled her with dread. Ayesha knew she had to do something to try to salvage what was left of her reputation, but there were no easy answers. In an attempt to make amends, she issued a public apology. Standing in front of the small crowd that had gathered outside her home, Ayesha spoke from the heart, her voice trembling as she explained her actions. She told them how she had only wanted to help her family, how she had never meant for anyone to get hurt, and how she deeply regretted what she had done. "I'm so sorry," she cried. "I never meant for things to go this far. I understand now that what I did was wrong, and I'm willing to take responsibility for it." But her apology, no matter how sincere, was met with skepticism. The damage had already been done, and the community had already made up its mind. The parents, many of whom felt betrayed by Ayesha's actions, couldn't find it in themselves to forgive her. The judgment from her neighbors and fellow parents was palpable, and it felt like there was no way to undo the damage she had caused. As the days passed, Ayesha's life unraveled further. Her name was tarnished, her reputation in ruins. Even the small network of friends she had built over the years turned their backs on her. The isolation she felt was suffocating, and every time she left the house, she was reminded of how much her actions had cost her. People would whisper as she walked by, and the stares of disapproval were impossible to ignore. Ayesha's guilt was suffocating. The weight of her decisions felt unbearable. She had thought she was making a quick and clever way to provide for her family, but now she had nothing but the ruins of her former life. Every night she would lie awake, replaying the events in her mind, asking herself if she could ever redeem herself. But the truth was, she wasn't sure if she ever could. Ayesha's journey to redemption was far from easy, and it was marked by the harsh reality that rebuilding trust takes time, something she didn't have much of in the eyes of her community. The weight of her past actions was something that could never be undone, but she was determined to try and make amends, even if it meant starting over from scratch. The first step was seeking therapy. Ayesha knew that the emotional and psychological damage she'd caused herself and her family was profound. The guilt that gnawed at her every waking moment was crippling, and she couldn't escape the constant reminders of her fall from grace. In therapy, Ayesha learned to process her feelings of shame, betrayal, and regret. It was difficult to face herself in the mirror and confront the person she had become, but she knew it was necessary for healing. She started to come to terms with the fact that her desperation for financial stability had clouded her judgment. Ayesha had always prided herself on being resourceful and doing whatever it took to take care of her children. But somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of the values that truly mattered. Her pursuit of quick money had blindsided her, and in the process, she had hurt those she loved most. To get away from the reminders of her past, Ayesha found a new job at a local cafe. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay wasn't much better than what she had earned at the school, but it was a fresh start. The cafe offered her a chance to escape the shame that followed her everywhere and to rebuild her life without constantly being in the public eye. It was a humble beginning, but it was also a path toward redemption. As she worked there, Ayesha started to interact with people who didn't know her past, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could begin again. Slowly but surely, Ayesha began to gain back a small amount of respect from the community. It wasn't easy, and some people never forgave her, but there were others who saw her for who she was trying to become rather than who she had been. The cafe customers, for instance, would compliment her on her hard work and kindness, and it reminded her that not everyone judged her by her worst mistake. This small validation was enough to keep her going. Ayesha spent a lot of time reflecting on her choices and what had led her down this path. She realized that the desperation she had felt, the need to provide more for her family, had clouded her ability to think clearly. It had led her to make a decision she would regret for the rest of her life. But in that reflection, Ayesha also gained a deeper understanding of moral integrity. She now knew that integrity wasn't something to be sacrificed, even for the sake of money or convenience. She had learned that while financial stability was important, it should never come at the cost of personal dignity or the well-being of others. Ayesha realized that her actions had affected not only her family, but also the parents and children who had trusted her. She had violated that trust, and no amount of money could ever make up for the harm she had caused. But she also learned that the lesson she had learned from this experience was priceless. Ayesha made a vow to herself that she would never again compromise her values, no matter how financially pressured she might feel. She understood that true success was not measured by how much money one made, but by the integrity with which one lived. Her fall from grace had been painful, but it had also taught her a lesson that would guide her for the rest of her life. She continued to work hard at the cafe, keeping a low profile, but silently working toward regaining her self-respect. Though she could never undo what had been done, Ayesha knew that she could work toward earning back the trust of her family and those who were willing to give her a second chance. She knew it would take time, but she was determined to show the world that people could change, that redemption was possible, and that mistakes didn't have to define who you were forever. Ayesha's attempts to rebuild her life were met with mixed reactions from the community. While some saw her effort to change as genuine and offered her second chances, many still viewed her with suspicion. The damage done to her reputation was permanent, and the whispers of what she had done never fully faded away. Some parents, especially those who had been directly affected by her actions, couldn't bring themselves to forgive her. The betrayal they felt was too deep, and no amount of apologies or hard work could erase the memory of what had happened. Even as Ayesha worked diligently to rebuild her life, she knew that the stigma would follow her for years to come. Her reputation was irrevocably tainted, and she would always be remembered as the woman who had sold breast milk to schoolchildren as yogurt. The weight of that mistake was something she couldn't escape, no matter how much she changed or how much she tried to move forward. Despite this, Ayesha found a small measure of peace. Her family, though still scarred, had slowly started to heal. Her children, though embarrassed by the past, began to understand that their mother had made a mistake, but they also saw her efforts to make amends. She found solace in the support of a few close friends who believed in her ability to grow beyond her past errors. It wasn't easy, but with time, she came to accept that her journey forward would be slow and complicated. As Ayesha continued to reflect on her choices, she came to understand just how dangerous desperation could be. Her need to provide for her family had led her to make an unethical decision, and the consequences were harsh and long-lasting. She realized the importance of honesty and integrity in every aspect of life. There were no shortcuts to true success, and the cost of dishonesty could be too high. In the end, Ayesha's life served as a constant reminder of the dangers of shortcuts and unethical choices. Though she had learned valuable lessons along the way, the consequences of her actions would always linger in the background. As the story drew to a close, Ayesha's journey remained marked by her mistake, but it also underscored the importance of learning from the past and striving to live a life of honesty and integrity, no matter the cost.